Let's rank some Kings players. Today I'm going to be ranking Kings players from least important to most important for the Kings' success for this upcoming season. This isn't about the future, the Kings' long-term future or anything like that. This is who needs to play the best for the Kings to be able to get wins this upcoming season. And so we will start at the bottom of the Kings roster, the bottom of the 18-player Kings roster, including two-way players, and we will work our way to the very top, to the most important player for the Kings for this upcoming season. So we can start at the very bottom. Starting with number 18, we have a two-way player, the Kings' most recent acquisition, most recent signing, someone who earned their two-way contract with the team in Summer League, and that is Daeqwon Plowden. Of course, two-way players most of the time are not going to be the most important players for your success in a season because they're going to be spending a lot of time in the G League, and that is exactly why Daeqwon Plowden is down at the bottom. He's also down at the bottom because he plays a position that the Kings don't necessarily need. Of course, you can never have too much shooting, but he plays at the shooting guard position where the Kings just have a lot of depth. So he's a 3-and-D type of player, but he's going to be playing most of his minutes in Stockton. The Kings have a lot of two guards. And so unless some trades happen to mix up the roster, he is just not going to be very important to the Kings' success for this upcoming season. Next up, we have a very similar player, and someone who actually isn't even on a two-way contract, someone who is on a standard contract, and that is Terence Davis. But he's just in a very similar role, where he's a shooting guard who's going to go out there and give you three-point shooting, some scoring, maybe a little bit of defense, but he's coming off a season where he played one game for the Kings. He just hasn't had a lot of NBA minutes. We don't really know how ready he is to be an NBA player, again, coming off injuries, and he's playing in the G League. But again, he's at a stacked position where the Kings most likely are not going to need a lot of Terence Davis minutes, so he's just not that important to this team for the upcoming season. And you could even see him getting waived before the season starts because he's on a non-guaranteed contract. Moving on to number 16, we have another two-way player, and that is Isaiah Stevens. Isaiah Stevens, I think, is a little more important than Daeqwon Plowden and Terence Davis because he can be a ball handler. And that's something that, the Kings have ball handling, but they don't have a lot of true point guards. They, of course, brought in Dennis Schroder, but, they have Dennis Schroder, they have Malik Monk off the bench, and then you have some ball handling in guys like DeMar DeRozan, Domantas Sabonis, Zach LaVine, Devin Carter, but there's not a lot of true point guards on this team. And so if someone gets injured, if multiple guys get injured, you could see a guy like Isaiah Stevens maybe getting a shot to play some point guard minutes. And so he's just that emergency point guard if the Kings need him. But again, he's a two-way player that will probably spend most of his time in Stockton. So in the grand scheme of things, not that important, but a little more important than guys like Daeqwon Plowden and Terence Davis because he has that ball handling ability. Coming in at number 15, I have Dario Saric. And that may be a little surprising to some people because Dario Saric is an NBA veteran that might somehow find his way into the Kings rotation. I'm really just hoping that he doesn't find his way into the Kings rotation at any point this season because I think there are a lot of players that can play in his position that should be playing over him in Isaac Jones, Drew Eubanks, Maxime Raynaud as a rookie. Dario Saric just did not play a lot of games last season. Sure, he has the ability to stretch the floor as a big man, play the 4 or the 5, but he doesn't add much defense or shot blocking ability, which is really what the Kings need off the bench. So he can add a little bit of offense, but that's not really what the Kings need. So I just don't deem him as very important because I think there are other players that can play that position that add more to this team. And speaking of other players that can add more to this team playing that position, moving on to number 14, and it is the Kings' last two-way player on this list, and that is Dylan Cardwell. And so I have Dylan Cardwell over a guy like Dario Saric because Dylan Cardwell has the ability to be a defensive beast, to be a rebounding monster. And so while Dylan Cardwell may not get many minutes at all with the Kings this season and may spend a lot of his season in Stockton, if he does come in and he is ready to play some NBA minutes, he could be very important to this team because of the type of player he is and the holes that the Kings have. If he can come in and be an NBA player that can give some minutes and fill in at the backup 5 at times if there are injuries or whatever, the Kings could really use his shot blocking ability and his rebounding ability when a guy like Domantas Sabonis is not in the game. And so while of course a guy like Dario Saric is much more proven than a guy like Dylan Cardwell, I think Dylan Cardwell fills a need much more than Dario Saric. So if Dario Saric plays well, it kind of doesn't really matter because the Kings have other players that could probably play just as well. But if Cardwell turns out to be a good player, that could be huge for the Kings because he fills a need as a shot blocking center and someone who just has that physicality and athleticism at the 5 position. Moving on to number 13, we have a vet. We have Doug McDermott. He's going to go out there and he's going to shoot 40% from 3. We know that's what he's going to do. And that could be useful for the Kings this upcoming season. I don't think he'll be someone who is in the rotation all the time, but the Kings could always use someone who's just going to come in and shoot the ball. We saw that last season at times. He started games at times last season for the Kings. You never know when you're going to need a shooter to just come off the bench and bang in some threes and win you a quarter and get you back into a game, which is what Doug McDermott did at times. So he's not going to be the most important player, but I could see the Kings needing his shooting at times. The Kings have some good shooters towards the top of this roster, like Zach LaVine, Keon Ellis, Keegan Murray. But outside of those guys, they do lack a little bit of three-point shooting. So I could see Doug McDermott making an impact in that area. Number 12 on this list is Devin Carter. And now Devin Carter, he kind of got moved down the list just because of the position he plays. If the Kings roster was balanced differently, then he would be more important to this team. But the fact of the matter is, he is a guard who probably plays best as an off-ball guard, and the Kings just have a lot of that. And so there aren't going to be a lot of minutes for him likely. I think he can be a solid rotational player that can contribute to winning basketball, but if the minutes aren't there for him, then it's just not going to matter. If Devin Carter comes into the season and doesn't play well, it's not really going to have a big impact on the team because they have other guys that they can just slot in there in his place. And so for the future of the Kings, I'm hoping that he comes in and plays well and earns minutes. But in terms of the Kings' success for this upcoming season, I just don't think he's that important of a player. Number 11 on this list is the Kings' most recent second-round pick, and that is Maxime Raynaud. While I don't think Maxime Raynaud is going to immediately find himself in the rotation this upcoming season, because we saw how he struggled with physicality in Summer League, he probably needs some time to get used to the NBA's physicality and pace and things like that. There are still many things that Raynaud needs to work on, but if he comes in and plays well, there could be a spot for him because the Kings' backup front court is not exactly loaded with the departure of Jonas Valanciunas. He's competing with, again, guys like Drew Eubanks, Isaac Jones, Dario Saric, Dylan Cardwell. If he comes in and can be a stretch 5 who can also add some rim protection, that's absolutely something that the Kings could use. And if he could come in and play alongside Domantas Sabonis, that could be huge as well. So I think just the archetype of player he is could be very important and could play a big role on the Kings. I don't think he'll actually be ready to have rotational minutes, at least at the beginning of this season, but if he does come in and play well enough to be in a rotation, then he is the type of player that the Kings need in their rotation. Number 10 is the guy that I think will actually get the backup 5 minutes, and that is Drew Eubanks. Drew Eubanks comes in just as a vet center who's going to block some shots, rebound a little bit, set some screens, finish around the rim. Not a flashy player at all, not a very exciting acquisition for the Kings, but just a vet guy who's probably going to come in and play some of those backup 5 minutes behind Domantas Sabonis. Coming in at number 9, we have Isaac Jones. I think Isaac Jones just represents a lot of the things that the Kings really need as an athletic, big-bodied 4-man who can play the 4, play the 5. Again, like I've said, there are spots for the Kings in the backup front court, and he could absolutely grab that position for himself, both the 4 or the 5. The Kings need someone to guard big forwards, and I think Isaac Jones could be that guy with his strength and long arms, shot blocking ability. On the offensive end, he can contribute definitely around the rim. His finishing is great. He's been developing that 3-point shot. I think he could step in to a real role for the Kings this upcoming season. Coming in at number 8 is someone who I feel bad for putting this low, but it's just the nature of this team right now, and it is Malik Monk. There's a reason why Malik Monk has been in trade rumors. There's a reason why Devin Carter has been in trade rumors. And so just like Devin Carter, he just slides down this list because of the Kings roster makeup. That's not to say that Malik Monk isn't still a very important part of this team. Malik Monk could find himself closing games at times if he plays well enough. When Malik Monk is playing well, especially off the bench, the Kings can be very, very hard to stop, especially offensively. But it's just hard to make the argument for him to be much higher when he plays on one side of the ball. He contributes on the offensive end. He doesn't contribute much on the defensive end. Sure, he's a great playmaker and scorer, but his three-point shot has fallen off. Hopefully, he can kind of bounce back from three this upcoming season, but he's a small guard who's going to be coming off the bench. The Kings have Dennis Schroder now. They have Zach LaVine. They have DeMar DeRozan. They have Keon Ellis. There's just a lot of guards, and there's also a lot of scoring guards. Dennis Schroder, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan can all score. Again, that's not to say that Malik Monk's scoring, and especially his playmaking, especially him being a backup playmaker, that's going to be very important, but I just can't put him higher because the Kings' need really revolves more around defense and having size on the wing. That's not something that Malik Monk provides off the bench. And so coming in at number 7 is someone who I hope can provide a little bit of that defense on the wing position off the bench, and that is Kings rookie Nique Clifford. I have Nique Clifford above Malik Monk. Does that mean I think that Nique Clifford is better than Malik Monk? Absolutely not. But I think Nique Clifford playing well is more important to the Kings' success than Malik Monk having a very good season. Because if Nique Clifford plays well, then he fills a massive need for the Kings off the bench as someone who can guard the wing position, can contribute as both an on-ball and off-ball player offensively. But the main thing is him just contributing as a wing off the bench that the Kings really do not have otherwise. The other wings off the Kings bench are like Doug McDermott, and I mean, I guess Daeqwon Plowden, if you count, him as a wing player. There just is no depth at the wing position, and so that's why Nique Clifford gets to be so high on this list, even as a rookie. Coming in at number 6, we have Dennis Schroder. Dennis Schroder coming in as the one true point guard on the Kings roster, and so his playmaking and defense, two-way potential as the starting point guard of this team is going to be very important. Him being able to facilitate and set up Domantas Sabonis, set up Zach LaVine, set up DeMar DeRozan, that is going to be very, very important. And it's also important that he isn't a liability on the defensive end, which is something that the Kings had at the point guard position at the end of last season with Malik Monk. Now, the reason that he isn't higher than this position is because there are guys who can take his spot in the rotation. Again, Malik Monk could take his spot at the end of games if Dennis Schroder isn't playing well. You could play Keon Ellis over Dennis Schroder and just have DeMar DeRozan be the point guard of the team if Dennis Schroder isn't playing well. And so if Dennis Schroder doesn't play well, because there are other guys to fill in that spot, that makes him less important. Again, he's still important, but it makes him less important than some of the other positions on this team. Coming in at number 5, I have DeMar DeRozan. DeMar could very well be the leading scorer of this team and be super important down the stretch of games. That's where he's probably going to shine for this team. He's going to be the guy down the stretch of games to be able to score the ball and make plays and be able to close out games for the Kings in the clutch. But on this list of importance, I just don't value scoring as high as some other attributes because say DeMar DeRozan goes out, well, you still have Zach LaVine to score. You still have Malik Monk to play in those positions to score. And Domantas Sabonis, of course, is going to be like a 19-point-per-game scorer like he always is. And DeMar really only contributes on one end of the floor. So if he goes out, you're going to add probably defense in his place. And that's really how I've kind of tried to judge this, is if this player was injured, if they go out, how much is that going to hurt the team? DeMar going out would absolutely hurt the team, but I have him at 5 because I just think that there are other players who mean more to the identity of the team and play in positions where they don't really have someone that can replace them. Whereas I think DeMar's scoring can be replaced. And again, that's really, the offensive end is really the only side of the ball that he is contributing on. And so that is why at number 4, I have Keon Ellis. Keon Ellis' defense is just so incredibly important to this team. Sure, he is a guard on a team with a lot of guards, so if he goes out, there's just going to be another good guard that comes into his place, but that guard is not going to be nearly as good defensively. The Kings just don't have a lot of players that can lock up defensively like Keon can, and that can make plays defensively. Whenever you look at the Kings lineup data over the last 2 years, the Kings defense is just so much better with Keon Ellis on the court. And he can knock down the three at a very high percentage, so he's adding to the offense as well. The Kings have a lot of guys that can contribute on the offensive end, but they just don't have a lot of guys that can do what Keon does on the defensive end, plus him not being a negative on the offensive end of the court either. Coming in at number 3, I have Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine is going to be super important for the Kings this upcoming season. Obviously, he's going to be maybe the leading scorer of this team. If not, he's going to be the second leading scorer of this team. His efficiency last season was insane, both from the field and from three. But that's not the area where the Kings really need him. I mean, of course, they need him to be an efficient scorer, of course. But they need him to play well in so many other ways because he's going to be getting a lot of minutes. They need him to be good defensively. He's going to be playing the 2 and the 3, I'm sure. They need him to be locked in defensively. They need him making quick decisions on the offensive end of the floor to get others involved. They need him to be aggressive offensively. And they also need him to be a force in transition because I think that's going to be a big part of the identity of this team. So Zach LaVine, his transition ability, his three-point shooting ability, those are very important to the identity that the Kings are coming into next season with. And then also they just need him to be a good defensive player because he's going to be out there a lot. The way he plays on both ends of the court is going to make a massive impact on whether the Kings are winning or losing games. Coming in at the number 2 spot, of course, we have Keegan Murray. Keegan Murray has been the guy who just has been left to fend for himself on the defensive end for so much of his career. He's going to have to play a ton of minutes for this team because there just is no one else as versatile defensively as him on this team. They need him to be able to lock up opposing guards, lock up opposing wings and forwards, and they also need him to be contributing on the offensive end. He is going to be asked to do so much this upcoming season, playing a ton of minutes, guarding the other team's best players. He needs to be able to lock those guys up for the Kings to have a good chance to win the game. But then he's also going to be asked to shoot well from 3 and shoot better than he has the past 2 seasons. He's also probably going to be asked to do a little more with the ball in his hands just because each season he has been asked to do a little more on offense with the ball in his hands. He has been one of the most important players on the Kings for the past few seasons just because there is no one that can come in and replace him. The reason Nique Clifford was even at number 7 on this list was because he can kind of, hopefully, sort of replace Keegan if Keegan goes out. But, I mean, Nique Clifford still can't replicate what Keegan Murray does, especially on the defensive end. That's why Keegan is so important to the success of this team. If he gets injured, the Kings are doomed. And then coming in at the top spot on this list of most important players, it is Domantas Sabonis. Since Domantas Sabonis got to Sacramento, the Kings have kind of forgotten how to play basketball when he goes off the court. He is so important to the way that this team plays offensively. Hopefully next season the Kings can figure it out a little bit when he goes to the bench. But if the last 3 seasons are anything to go by, the Kings are going to be a much worse team when he is off the court. The way he's able to run the offense, facilitate things, he just adds that flow and movement to the Kings offense that completely goes away when he goes to the bench. And then I think it's also underrated how important he is to the Kings defense. There are times where the Kings defense falls apart when he goes to the bench as well. You know, maybe that is because the Kings have not really had good backup 5s. But I mean, that's part of what makes someone so important. If you don't have a good backup, then that player just is very important and needs to play a lot of minutes. He is able to anchor the Kings defense to make it respectable. And when he goes out of the game, it can look very rough at times. I mean, his defensive rebounding is very important. His ability to push the pace, offensive rebound, screen. He shot 40% from 3 last year. He is easily the most important player on this team. And without him, the Kings would be absolutely screwed. So anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. Let me know what you guys think of my list, what you guys would have done differently, who you think are the most important players for the Kings this upcoming season. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.